Finding peace in the midst of the storm when life is raging around you is difficult, even for those who have great faith. Like Peter, it's not always easy to have faith and trust that God is in control. We often get overtaken by the waves and feel like we are lost and alone and drowning in hurt and pain and sorrows. How do you keep your eyes on Jesus when the storms of life seem to overtake you? Now, in the fall watch of the night, Jesus came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost!" and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, I am, don't be afraid." And answering, Peter said to him, "Master, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water to go to Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became terrified, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Master, save me." And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and grabbed him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Peter had been walking on water in the middle of the storm, but as soon as he took his eyes off Jesus and put them on his problem, he began to sink. Jesus was right there with him in the midst of the storm, and yet his faith faltered, and he worried more about the power of the storm than the one who controls the wind and the waves. I do find it interesting to note that Jesus didn't calm the wind and waves to make Peter feel safer on the water. It tells us that the wind stopped after they got into the boat. God isn't just about making all your problems magically go away. He is about getting you through them and making them teach you opportunities so that you can exercise your faith. He went to them in the midst of the storm. He went to them in the midst of their fear. He met them in the problem. He did not take the problem away. But our friend Peter wanted proof that Jesus was there with him. And Jesus granted that proof. You see, Peter had already seen Jesus at work in the storm. He had been in the boat while Jesus slept. He had been there when Jesus was awake and calmed the wind and the waves. Peter knew that Jesus commanded even the weather. He had been there when Jesus healed the blind and the lame. He had been there when Jesus cast out demons, and yet, in the midst of the storm, he looked at the problem instead of the problem solver. Do we do the same, or do we keep our eyes on Jesus in spite of the wind and waves that threaten us? When you take your eyes off Jesus and focus them on the problem, we sink. Rather than having peace in the middle of the storm, we falter and fall, and we are overcome by it. Do you keep your eyes on Jesus or on the waves? Peter is a great example of how we often react to the fierce storms around us. When the storms of life rage against you, when you go through hard times in the midst of life, do you keep your eyes focused on the problem or the problem solver? You see, like the disciples learned, Jesus won't always take the storm away, but he will always be there with us in the midst of it. He will be there with us in the midst of all sicknesses, of our jobless, our failing marriages, our kids falling away, our financial problems. It doesn't matter what it is. And like Peter, he's always going to allow us, if we place our faith in him, to rise above the storm and walk on the waves. Are you a wave walker, or are you sinking in the sea of life's turmoil? Do you keep your eyes on Jesus, or are you watching the waves? The same Jesus that let Peter walk on water will put his hand out to you as well and bear you up. When you look at Noah in the Old Testament, he didn't escape the flood. The flood raged around him, and yet God himself sealed Noah and his family safely in the ark. They were still in the midst of the storm that destroyed every living creature, but Noah had faith enough to construct a boat without a sign of rain because he knew that God was a promise keeper. He withstood being mocked and ridiculed and persecuted because his faith in Adonai was greater than his fear of people's opinions. God said, "Build it," and he did. For 40 days, the waves crashed against the ark, and yet Noah and his family kept their eyes on Adonai's promise. Like Noah, the storm may rage all around you, but God has made you a promise that he will be there with you. Noah didn't keep his eyes on the waves. He kept his eyes on the sky. Keep your eyes on Jesus and walk on the waves. When we get a bad report, when life hands us trials and struggles, and it's real, when we feel alone and wonder how we are ever going to get through the day, you've got to walk on the waves. Keep your eyes on Jesus because He's the perfecter of your faith. And you've got to go to Him and He's going to give you all of the peace in the midst of the storm. He is standing in the storm with His arms outstretched, calling you to walk to Him. You just need to keep your eyes on Him and off the storm. He will handle the storms in your life. He will calm the wind and the waves, and when it seems like He doesn't, you just need to worry about keeping your eyes on Him. And like the moment Peter walks on water, when he kept his eyes on the wonderful face of our Savior, you will walk through your storm with your eyes on Him. The problem may not disappear. I must tell you, the turmoil might even worsen for a time. But God has it under control and He is walking in the midst of all of the situation. We don't see what He does. We don't even know what He knows. A time came in my life when I went through the storm, when I was looking for an admission into the university, and every door seemed to slam shut. I could have looked at the waves, and I won't tell you that there weren't times that I glanced at them for a moment, but then I lifted my eyes up and I saw God doing an amazing thing. What I thought was the worst time in my life turned out to be the best, the absolute best. God showed up like He always did. He showed up. When I was focused on the waves, I felt like I was sinking. But when I looked up to keep my eyes on the Messiah, I saw the amazing, wonderful things that He was doing. If you watch Jesus, you're going to be a wave walker and you're going to find peace in the midst of the storm. It doesn't matter how dense it might seem. It doesn't matter how vast and deep the waters might seem. It doesn't matter how difficult the situations might look to you. It doesn't even matter how impossible the situation might be. If God says He is there, and if He asks you to keep your eyes on Him and keep your focus on Him, and to take your eyes for a second off the waves and the storms and the tribulations and the trials, then just do it. Because the second that you keep your eyes on Jesus, then you're going to have the best moment of your life. You are going to smile even in the middle of your circumstances. Even when you don't understand why you're smiling. Even when people don't understand why you're smiling, you will smile. Because you obeyed a simple commandment. Take your eyes off the storm and focus on Jesus. The Lord give you strength and bless you.